time for you to step off the addiction roller coaster for good and learn a solution that works. Join addiction experts, hosts of the popular podcast, The Addiction Solution, and authors of The Freedom Model for Addictions, Mark Sharon and Michelle Dunbar, to learn a solution that will provide you and your loved one freedom from the addiction battle for good. It's called Families Moving Past Addiction Masterclass, and it's a live online exclusive event where you'll hear information about addiction we guarantee you've never heard before, and that's great news. If you love someone struggling with an addiction, then this masterclass is for you. For more information or to enroll, click the link provided and register soon for the date that works for you, because each class will be limited to just 50 participants so we can best serve you. Hi, all you wonderful podcast listeners. This is Michelle, just reminding you that if you live here in the U.S., we're happy to ship you a free paperback copy of The Freedom Model for Addictions, Escape the Treatment and Recovery Trap. All you have to do is go to freebook.freedommodel.org. We ask that you just pay for shipping. If you live outside the U.S. and you want a free PDF, you can email me at info@thefreedommodel.org and I will send one to you. Thanks everyone for listening. Welcome to the Addiction Solution Podcast. I'm Michelle Dunbar. Enjoy listening and watching as addiction experts Mark Sharon and I cover controversial as well as helpful topics on addiction, how to move past it, and other related subjects. As two of the co-founders of the Freedom Model, Mark and I will give you a completely new perspective on the topics that matter to you. We will take to task the Recovery Society's lies and misinformation and replace them with facts, research, and the methods to move on from addiction struggles without 12-step meetings, rehabs, and the shackles of endless recovery. Let's escape the treatment and recovery trap together and learn to be free. Welcome to the truth. Hey everyone, welcome to the Addiction Solution. I'm Michelle Dunbar.
And I'm Mark Sheeran.
And we, along with our colleague Stephen Slate, co-authored The Freedom Model for Addictions and The Freedom Model for the Family.
That's right.
And it is actually, the Freedom Model is actually explains exactly how people solve addiction.
That's right. And they solve it for good.
Yep.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to abstain. It might mean that you successfully adjust your use to some non-problematic level.
It means that you find freedom, that you no longer feel a slave to your substance or your behavior that you feel like is out of your control. It means you totally know you're in control.
That's right. And I just want, for those that are visually watching, I have the one last Freedom Model cup. All the other ones have simply died
or vanished, or people took them.
Yeah.
Like when they were at the retreat, we had a bunch of them made.
This is an epic cup.
It is
worth millions of dollars.
People have asked us, they're like, are you guys ever going to do some like
swag?
Merch, some swag?
Nope. I'm the only one.
Maybe at some point.
I don't know. Coffee mugs kind of cool.
Like coffee mugs are cool.
All right. Yeah. So let us know. Should we make little?
So we make some merch.
I
put it up on our
sobriety
website.
coins.
Oh
Psych.
God, no. Holy cow. Do you remember that Bob had those bumper stickers?
Oh yeah. I think I might have had a Friend of Bill W or some bullshit like
Bob
that.
had, I think it was Live and Let Live and
Easy Does It.
Easy Does It.
So silly.
Oh my God. Silly. Yeah. We spent some time in AA, just saying.
Yeah.
So we know both sides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Regretfully.
Regretfully.
All right, so today we're going to talk about choosing happiness. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite topics because I wrote and came up with the concept. I didn't come up with the concept. This is an age-old concept that happiness is what drives humanity, right? The pursuit of happiness.
Positive drive principle, which is chapter 7 in our book.
But that term, I just termed it that. So that's my term, right? Positive drive principle.
Yeah, he made that up.
Yeah. So, but I think it's one of my favorite topics because it's the truth.
Yeah.
So people are motivated by what they see benefits them. And we've talked about it endlessly throughout our podcast, but it can't be said enough because when you become aware that you're driven this way, and that you're choosing things based on sometimes hidden quiet benefit that's in the back of the decision, you suddenly realize maybe that's not the best decision. Maybe there's greater happiness over there, or making this change in this decision. So here's my point. When you walk into a situation, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's me talking about this coffee cup or sitting in this chair or sitting the way I am, I'm doing all of that because in this moment, I believe this is the best place for me, the most beneficial place for me. And so the question becomes, if you become aware of your positive drive principle, that you're in the pursuit of happiness all the time, I could be asking myself, do I really want to be here? Maybe there's something better I could do. Now, I don't believe there is. I believe being here with you folks is the best thing I could be doing right now. But 10 minutes from now, I get to change my mind and move my life forward. And it's a powerful thing when you know that.
Yeah, it definitely is. What the reason we thought about this topic today is because Mark did a video yesterday on TikTok that also ends up in our reels on Facebook and Instagram, and it was about watching people and wondering if as you watch people, if you ever sit in a parking lot at a grocery store and you see people coming in and out, a lot of people look pretty unhappy.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's because the grocery store, sometimes people really hate the grocery store. But somebody commented, Mark said, I think most people are happy basically. And somebody commented and said, no, I think most people are unhappy like I am.
So that's an interesting perspective, right? I think that if you were to poll people, I haven't looked at studies. I'm sure there's studies about this. I'll have to look it up. But I bet you if you polled people, they would assume that most people are unhappy. Maybe that's not the case.
Right.
I tend to be the optimist because I used to be many years ago a very negative person, very self-pitying person, and a very depressed person. And there was value in staying that way. Let's talk about that for a second. We talked about this not that long ago in a podcast, but even that was chosen as a form of insulative sort of happiness where I didn't have to change much.
Right.
So I would stay
Right.
depressed and I would keep that
self-pity, right?
Yeah.
You invest in the self-pity, which we talked about, I think, in the last episode too.
Yeah. So are there people that do that? Of course. Are there people that see value in their sicknesses and their misery? Yes. I'll give you an example. I have chronic back pain. I've had it since I was 15 years old when I got into a motorcycle accident. And I've had basically 2 vertebrae that are pretty beat up and screwed up, and herniated discs, all that fun stuff. So I've had this problem. And my son asked me just 2 days ago, he goes, so you've had this pain for nearly 40 years. And I said, yeah. And he goes, does that bother you? And I said, honestly, I don't even really think about it unless it becomes debilitating, which it does like every couple of years, right? For a spell of a week or two. But beyond that, it's just something I live with, and I'm really totally okay with it. So even in a painful situation, you can frame it in a way that it becomes tolerable or even forgotten, or you move on from it. My point is, when you become aware of your positive drive, you have options.
Yeah.
You have options. You don't have to stay hanging on to the status quo. And that's where dreams die. I think that's where happiness dies, or an upper level of happiness gets squelched, is when you just keep the status quo and you say, this is the best it's going to get. Well, then it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think too, I want to just make a point, and that is, I think whatever you focus on, you see. So if you're thinking of red cars, you'll see a bunch of red cars. If you're
that's a great point.
thinking of, I'm unhappy, so I believe everybody else is unhappy, you'll see unhappy people everywhere. Right?
That's a good point.
So, a long time ago, I chose that to make to see the positive in things. And it was something I had to consciously choose to do because I wasn't that way. It didn't seem like I was that way naturally, or I didn't learn that as a child, to just see the positive. Everything was a fight all the time for me. So I saw fights everywhere. Right. And Mark knows I learned that from my dad.
Yeah.
Everything was a fight for
Me
him and
too.
still
Me
is.
too. Me too.
Yeah, so but I decided when I was young and I was starting my family that I didn't want to live that way, seeing fights everywhere. So I consciously made the decision to see positive, and it became mindful of when I was seeing negative. So if I was around, which we were in AA at the time, so I was around a lot of really messed up people and gossip and awful stuff. And I would slide into that pretty easily, but I had to consciously um, change it. I had to consciously try to shift conversations from talking shit about people
Mhm.
to being positive, like, well, let's see if we can see the positive in this, which, some people are like, it's toxic positivity.
How can so crazy?
No, no, there it's shitty to talk shit about people, and it makes you feel shitty when you talk shit about people. But like I said, if you see the negative, if you focus on the negative, you will see it everywhere because it exists. But it exists no more no more than the positive exists. Like it's pretty equal,
Yeah.
wouldn't you say?
I would say, and I think that my wife said to she was talking to some family member. We just had a party for my in-laws' 50th
50th
anniversary.
wedding anniversary. It's
Yes.
amazing.
It was a great party. And she said, she was talking to her brother, and she said, Mark is the only person I know that sees the glasses half full all the time. And she goes, it's so annoying.
It's toxic positivity, Mark.
And it does annoy her, because I'll tell you why. And it annoys a lot of people.
It does annoy a lot of people because it
because-
annoys my husband too.
Yeah, because I refuse to play into being negative. I just refuse. And here's why. When I was a little kid, I had no control. When you're a young little boy, 8 years old, 5 years old, you have no control over your sphere of influence. Your influence is tiny.
Your
and
circumstances,
yeah,
they're just in your lap.
And my circumstances sucked. I mean, it was just a horrible way to grow up. And so I had to make a decision. And ironically, I lived in utter and complete depressed misery and fear and sadness and anxiousness and depression up until about 19. And then from 19 to 24 is where I made this conversion of thought and action, where I said, no, I have already lived the life where I've dedicated myself to misery, and I know the results. And I don't have anybody out here that's just going to pick me up and fix me.
Right.
That reality hit me young and was scary. And it's scary for everybody, that when innocence is lost, my innocence was lost very young. And, suddenly you realize that there's a big bad world that does not give two shits about you. And so I had to make a choice. Am I going to see the world as evil?
That's right.
Or am I going to create a world for myself that is positive? Because the only thing I can change is me.
Yeah.
I can't change my boss. I can't change the mind of others. I can't change how I grew up. I can't change my genetics. I can't change any of the things that I have. What I can change is my mind.
That's it. That's the only thing. You only have control over yourself. And I saw this video. I don't know if I think it was on Instagram Reels or something, and it was about it was a woman talking about being Gen Xer and how we grew up, right? Because we're Gen X, and we grew up where our parents really they were living, they just lived their lives. Like, for a lot of us, our parents weren't really involved in our lives all that much. And
school wasn't, nobody was up your ass.
Nobody, like they just expected you to to get your work done. I played on, 4 varsity teams in high school. I was a 2-sport collegiate athlete, and I like your coaches weren't like coddling you. There was none of this. Oh, it's 90 degrees, so we can't practice today. Like,
Yeah, that's so
I mean,
ridiculous.
so this woman was saying, we just kind of figured shit out as we were told, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and the things that were said to us, like would say to kids today, to the millennials and Gen Z didn't really get that. Maybe early millennials got that a little bit, but really we were like the last generation where we were just expected to figure shit out.
So you were placed in an atmosphere or an environment where you had to choose your happiness.
Yes,
Yeah.
where nobody told us that life should be happy. Nobody told us that life should be easy. Like, we got the opposite. It's
No.
like life's gonna like
kick your ass.
kick your ass. And like, when I can remember being like 16 or 17, and one of my I have cousins that are much older than me, and I can remember one of them saying, "What the hell do you have to be upset about? Like, everything's handed to you. Like, life hasn't even begun to fuck you yet." Right? I was like 16 and like suicidal and angsty and everything, and they're like, "Just suck it up," And am I like, so this woman didn't come to a conclusion in the video. Like, she's like, and then I'm watching, what she said was, now I'm watching the kids today, the Gen Zers, which are our kids, um, like just not really kind of figure out this life thing and really struggling. And there's higher rates of depression and anxiety and suicide and everything else. And I'm like, you just answered your question.
Yeah, when you make valid leaving this earth as a viable social construct, and you normalize it.
Well, yeah,
you normalize that the way out is to give up. You infantilize people.
yeah.
I was just hanging out with one of my buddies. We were talking about the fact of how we worked in the cornfields when we were kids. And he got, we had to do what's called detasseling corn, which is you're basically out in July and August picking the top of the corn off, the tassel off the top, the pollen tassel. And so you're covered in bugs biting you, and you're sweating, and you're out in 90-degree heat. It's miserable. It's just utterly miserable. When it's pouring rain, you're out there. When you're in the back of a truck going from field to field, like, basically like migrant workers, right?
Yep.
And I grew up doing this sort of stuff, and we were talking about it, and he goes, dude, we haven't seen each other in 30 years. And he goes, dude, that was the shittiest thing ever. That was fucking slave labor. We made like $2.50 an hour.
Yep.
And he goes, but you know what? It was fucking magical.
Yeah.
And you know what? He had a horribly difficult upbringing. I had a horribly difficult upbringing. And both of us were like, it was the saddest time of our lives, but the most magical too.
Yeah.
And because we had to find happiness on our own, and we would go out on our bicycles and ride 30 miles a night and go and get in fights, and just, it was a classic 80s movie. Our life was a classic 80s movie.
Yeah, those 80s movies are somewhat realistic of how we grew up, which
it was painful.
It was horribly painful, but also just amazing,
because nobody was telling us what to think.
That's
how
right.
fragile we were.
Nope.
None of that. The happiness was, hey, if you're going to be happy, dude. It's up to you.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, really? And that was scary. And somebody posted on one of my social media posts about this yesterday and said, I think that sadness, and that it's okay to feel those things. And I said, I agree.
Well, sure. Absolutely.
I agree. It's normal life stuff.
Yes. That was the one thing I think I learned in my 20s, was that nobody's happy all the time. And life is, as Marcus said, is kind of gamed against you to a certain extent. So ultimately, it really is up to you how you view it, how you view the challenges that you have, how you view the relationships that you have. If you look to be offended, you'll be offended.
My God, you said something earlier that was so poignant. And that is, if you look for red cars, you'll see red cars. Right?
Yeah.
it's your levels of observation are profound as a human being, because you will see in the world what you project out, what you want to see. And that was Viktor Frankl's whole story,
That's right.
right? That you'd have the guys that were the prisoners in Auschwitz, and he goes, you would know who would die that night because they would give up. And there were certain
you could
indicators
see it.
of when they would decide to just literally leave the world. And he goes, but then you have the other people that didn't, that held on and gave meaning to their life. So I want to get into meaning for a second, and happiness. People are always looking for, what is the meaning of life? If there's a question that's been happening since the beginning of mankind and we still don't have an answer, most likely the answer is there is no meaning, direct meaning. Maybe the answer is you make the meaning.
Right.
And that's what I came to terms with somewhere in my 20s, probably 24 years old. I went, oh, it's up to me. And that's where you lose your innocence, because when you have innocence, you believe the world is there to cater to you. You don't know any better. You just assume that things are going to be okay. And then you lose your innocence when when you come to the realization, my God, they're not okay. And nobody seems to care.
Right.
You know? And then it's up to you to provide your own meaning to your experience, right? And so I had to put meaning to abuse, pain, neglect, and being anxious and scared all the time. How do you make meaning out of that? Well, I decided that I was going to leave my hometown and rebuild my life and become a new person. I made the conscious decision to do that. And I made it. It took me about 5 years.
Yeah.
You know,
it becomes, challenges become opportunities if you look at them differently. Right. So like, that's the part I was actually going to go into as well, is you can be happy you can choose to be happy even when your circumstances are not ideal, or even when your circumstances are awful.
Yeah, downright terrible.
You know?
Yeah.
And so let's just define happiness briefly. Because happiness has a lot of meanings, and a lot of people will think of, when they think happy, they think joyful, elated. And that's not what we're talking about. It can be.
Right. It's a whole range.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, sometimes, feeling happier is just a contentment. And sometimes it's just, one step above being miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can choose to be happier. You can choose to look at negative circumstances in a way that life is futile, that, see, this is an indicator that nothing ever works out for me. I mean, this used to be me, the nihilistic view of, look at, see, once again, nothing ever works out for me, and everybody sucks, and the world is terrible, and people are awful. Or you can look at it, you can choose to look at it like, okay, this is another challenge that I have to face. And what can I learn from it? And maybe I need to change my circumstances. Maybe I need to make a conscious decision to move in a different direction, or move past this challenge. Just kind of choose to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Yeah. So everything you're talking about is stuff that we hear every day in bits and pieces that we're trying to condense into this half hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people, I can remember, boy, you can get really trapped in that nihilistic place where you're searching for the grand meaning. I know that me, as a philosopher, I consider myself a philosopher because I'm always trying to find the truth in the world. And boy, when you're at that stage, and the stage of losing your innocence can be much later in life. I know people who had very wonderful, almost insulated lives.
Charmed.
Very charmed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're just, circumstances played to their favor. And I think sometimes it's called privilege, but I hate that word because it's been so politicized.
But it's not just that, because we've known a lot of people of privilege that were pretty unhappy. Oh, yeah, right?
Yeah. So that's not a good
word. So that's no, it's more like they were
just had good luck, man.
Not just good luck, but they weren't almost not deep thinkers.
Yeah.
Do you
That
know what
can
I
be the
mean?
case. Yes.
Like
Yes.
things were kind
Well,
of a
they
little
didn't
bit
have to be.
easy. Right.
They didn't have to
Right.
be because circumstances landed in their favor. And then they hit about 35, 40, sometimes 50, and they hit the
Maybe
hard
the
spot.
right.
Life
Maybe
kind of
bad
came.
marriage,
Yeah.
maybe, whatever challenges get thrown there. Maybe they get laid off, something happens and they get laid off, or
And a series of crises
yeah.
could happen. And so once that hits you, it's what do I do with this? And I think that for me, I created, like I said, and this is really the crux of what I want to talk about, is I created meaning. What was I going to do with this challenge? And in my case, I said, every challenge that comes my way, I'm going to excel at it. I just made the decision. I was like, if I learn something, I'm going to be good at it. And I got to tell you, it wasn't easy, but I was happy in the process because I was like, that was important to me.
Yeah.
I was such a loser as a kid, such a frightened person to try and take risk. I didn't play sports. I didn't do the things that I knew I could do. And I hated myself for avoiding life. I was so lost. And I said, no more. Anything that scares me, I'm going to confront. The first thing I did, and where I learned this, was fist fighting as a kid, because I was this small kid that was picked on. And then I said, no, I'm going to learn to box and I'm going to kick some people's asses. And I went out and I did that, and it was a lot of black eyes and a broken nose and a couple stays in the hospital. But you know what? I learned and I became a little badass, and then I realized, oh, I can do that. If I can do that, if I can face that kind of violence, maybe there's other things in my life. And then I went to college and I got a straight 4.0, GPA. And then I learned to play drums. And this isn't a me show. The point is I started with shit.
Yeah.
I started with every excuse to say, fuck it and be in prison or dead.
Yeah.
I
want to go back a little bit, because I know we have Gen Zers and millennials that listen to this podcast. And I'm not bagging on your generations. What I'm saying is you were done a grave disservice by us, your parents, by the school systems, because some of you haven't adequately learned how much control you have in your mind to change the trajectory of your life. Just like Mark says, when we waste time worrying about what other people think of us, worrying about who's offending who, maybe how I come across to other people, or when we waste time doing that, we're not living. We're living kind of in a fearful cocoon, which is not positive. It's not positive. And I genuinely feel like our culture today encourages that kind of non-living. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It totally does. I mean, I look at it's hard for me to even have a conversation with a millennial because they come from a place of such sadness and
it's awful.
It really is. And it's so unnecessary. I can't believe the shit they're being taught.
Well, and it starts with the whole addiction thing that you learn in school.
That's right.
Which is that you are powerless, and these substances, which quite frankly can be fun and can be not so awful, but these substances have these powers to somehow enslave you and take over your life. And it's the whole old idea that there's evil spirits in them that can take you over, and it's all nonsense. It's not true. And then you couple that with being taught that depression and anxiety and trauma and all of these things will affect your life forever.
And that is such a massive lie. It is. If I could
talk about nihilistic thinking.
Yeah. I'm going to look right into the camera and tell, if anybody's out there and they believe that is a bullshit lie that you've been sold.
Yep. Not true.
Not true. You have a mind. If you're watching this, you obviously can watch me. And it's just a lie. Depression isn't something that happens to you. It is not clinical. And this is going to piss
And there's
people off.
not chemical imbalances. There's a
Right.
lot
And
of
that's what I
research
mean.
that shows that that's not what's happening.
There's some great articles about this, great research about this that we've posted on the Freedom Model in the blog. Depression is the way you see the world, the way you frame circumstances. We cover this in the
Both
book.
he and I struggled with it.
Oh, look at, I've had a gun in my mouth. I know what it's like to
Yeah.
be completely suicidal. I know what it's like to be depressed for years,
Yep.
deeply, deeply depressed, and fight through that. But when you realize that you can change your perspective and that it's not a clinical thing in this respect. And when I say clinical, there's no test for it. If there was a chemical imbalance, it's very simple. They'd take a blood test. They do a PET scan. They'd say, here's where your depression is. They don't have that. Just so you know, they don't have that. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's bullshit marketing that they've been selling.
We're going to get emails about this. I know.
But it's the reality.
It's the reality. And we're not saying that therapy can't be helpful to people.
And we're also not saying that people aren't depressed beyond belief.
Right.
Or feel hopeless. I've been totally depressed for the first 18, 19 years of my life.
Yep.
Deeply lost, deeply, deeply depressed and anxious. I was scared all the time. I was the thoughts I would have, the rotational thoughts I would have. I thought I was nuts. I drank and drugged heavily for 6 years. We've both been there.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I had a diagnosis of bipolar. So at 20 years old, and I struggled even after stopping my heavy substance use. I struggled with a belief system that something was wrong with my brain for an additional 10 to 15 years. So it is. So I get it. I understand it. So if this is something that you struggle with, we're not being trite when we say happiness is a choice. We're not.
Here's how we know this. I did in the 12th edition of our book, I did a study on happiness rates throughout the world. And there's actually, you can look this up. Yeah. I can't remember what countries anymore because it's been going back 10, 15 years. But you can look up studies that show that many third world countries have much higher indexes for happiness than we do here in America.
Yep.
If it was clinical or if it was driven by culture
and circumstances,
horrible circumstances, some of the countries that rank higher than the United States are in civil war.
Yeah.
They don't have water. They don't have food. They don't have medicine.
They have like famine.
But yet they rank higher when the populace is interviewed than we do in the happiness index. So the question becomes why, if it were clinical, and we're a melting pot of genetics. So this whole genetic depression thing is bullshit too, by the way. There's no evidence of that. So we're a melting pot of all these different cultures, and suddenly only in the West do we become depressed at the rates that we are. Maybe it's what you're being taught.
Yep.
Okay. So
maybe it's because you got a lot of time on your hands to just kind of ruminate on, and in many cases, problems that aren't affecting you in that moment. I mean, a lot of times, depression is really investing in this negative thinking.
And it's investing in future thoughts that haven't happened and past thoughts that you can't change.
Yeah.
And then not looking at your current circumstances adequately and accurately to say, am I in actual danger in this moment? Am I actually poverty stricken? Are the fears justified? And when you do that, when you stop, I do this exercise with people all the time.
Yeah.
They'll go nuts and tell me all these things that are wrong. And I go, wait a minute.
Right now,
this is what we can change right now. Is it bad? And they say, well, yeah. And then they start talking about the future. And I go, no, stop that. Right now.
Yeah.
Are you dying? I know that the divorce is terrible. I know that your addiction is terrible. I get that. I've been there. I get it. But right now we have to start from reality. And the reality is right now, as we sit here, let's start from a basis of reality and what we can change. We can only change right now.
Yeah. What can I do right now?
That's right. And then suddenly they start feeling better because they now have some control, because you can control right now in your own mind and say, I can do this, this, and this. And suddenly they're not depressed because they're doing something. And it might be small, it might be tiny. you know?
It's the difference between being proactive for your life and reactive.
Yeah. It's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. So yes, happiness is a choice.
It is.
It's a conscious decision. It does require, in some cases, what I call faithful thinking,
Yep.
which has nothing to do with religion or God or spirituality. Faithful thinking is faith in yourself and knowing that you have the power and ability to change your circumstances, to affect real change in your life, to be happier, you
That's right.
know? So this goes along with substance use problems and addiction, because so many people have this belief system that their depression and anxiety and their emotional problems cause them to use substances heavily. We do address that in the Freedom Model for Addictions, throughout the book, but specifically in chapters 5 and 6,
Yep.
and then 17 through 20. Because 17 through 20 really show you that alcohol and drugs aren't helping you with these things. Not at all. They don't have the pharmacological power to do that. And we're not saying that you might not derive some pleasure from them, because you may.
Right.
It's very different. What we're saying is they don't have the pharmacological power to help you with those things.
They can't make your mind up for you.
They can't change your mind.
They can't change your mind. So we've hit a lot of different things. And if you're new to the podcast, you might rebel at a lot of this, but I suggest that you go through, we have over 170 episodes. I suggest that you go through them and you'll see that we're coming from a place of love and compassion. It's compassionate to show people that they're in charge of their lives.
That's so true. What a great point.
It's compassionate to show people that only they can change themselves. It's compassionate to get away from this idea that experts, the tyranny of experts, has to be your lot in life, that you're at the mercy of some professional that doesn't even know you. Now, I'm not saying I see a therapist once in a while when shit gets heavy. I'm not saying I don't take medications. I go through things the old-fashioned way, and that's I change my mind.
You figure things out.
Yep. And I've come from a pretty horrible fucking place as a kid, where there was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, there was deep neglect, and a broken house, a broken family.
And we've watched people deal with the worst circumstances. Please keep in mind that we have been doing this for over 30 years and helping people that have had just suffered some of the worst trauma you can imagine, and watched them. You know, when you see somebody figure it out and figure out how much power they actually have, it's pretty remarkable.
Magical.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking remarkable. So look at, we're not saying you shouldn't see a therapist. You should see a therapist, but you should be choosy. You know, you want to choose somebody that is solution based.
Right. If you feel like you're more of a victim.
Right. Not a good therapist.
If the therapist is riding this coattail that, hey, you know, you really are susceptible to addiction, and all of a sudden you feel down and you feel more victimized, run away.
Go to a different one.
Go to somebody else, because everything inside of you gives you the capability of problem solving.
Yes, exactly.
You were born with it.
That's right.
I realized this young, thank God, and I've been living my life accordingly. You can too. And
I had to learn that from a therapist, just so you know. Yeah. I was fortunate enough to have somebody that was a very positive solution-based person.
My wife too.
Yeah, who showed me that I have the power. It actually even showed me that this whole bipolar diagnosis was not a curse at all, but you know, I'm not somebody that was, well, I was pretty crazy. I did kind of have very wide ranges, but she showed me how to maximize the strengths that I have and minimize some of the challenges that I had.
Right. And that it's okay to be a sensitive person. I was this enormously sensitive kid in a brutal environment. Well, of course I was going to frame the world in a bad in a bad way. And there were things that I was doing to protect myself that didn't make sense anymore as I became an adult. So
Yes.
so all of this is, we're hitting you with something that might be new, and especially in this culture we live in. But I might also point out, it's not working very well.
No, it
This modern
isn't.
psychology is not helpful to people. The rates of suicide skyrocket. They just did a study. They did a poll where they said 24% of millennials in college feel that they would be better not to be on this earth.
Is it millennials or Gen Zers? Because Gen Zers,
whatever is the most recent.
yeah,
Gen Zers,
Gen
right,
Zers
right.
are,
I get 'em mixed
they're
up.
very unhappy. Like 1 in 4 feel like they'd be better off dead.
Yeah. So the question is, if this modern psychology, the psychology that you are the minion of your biochemical reality and circumstances, boy, you want to take all the arsenal of your tools that you were given as a human being, throw them out the window
know.
and be at the mercy of circumstance. Good luck.
Yeah,
That's a bad way of going through the world, because you're going to lose.
yeah.
So
But
we're
are
giving you the
powerful.
winning ticket.
That's right. You're powerful. You're incredibly powerful. So if you need to see a therapist, find somebody who knows that and is willing to tell you.
That's right. See somebody who really, really knows what they're talking about and builds up the situation and gives you a path where you fix the problem.
Yes, strategies that work.
All right, everybody.
Just like the freedom model, strategies that work.
That's right. So for addiction, this is your answer.
That's right. That's right.
All right,
All
everybody.
right, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Take care.
Are you struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, but you don't want to go to rehab or group meetings? Well, that's why we created the non-12-step Freedom Model Coaching Program in 2011. Through video conferencing on Zoom or Skype, you can work privately with a certified Freedom Model coach from your home or office on your schedule. And here's the best part. With the Freedom Model, you'll never be labeled an addict or an alcoholic, and we won't tell you to go to 12-step meetings or hamper your life with endless recovery rituals. Instead, you can learn exactly why addiction isn't a disease and how you can solve the problem for good and move on with your life. Do you want to be completely free from your addiction? Do you want to never have to attend meetings, rehabs, or addiction counseling ever again? And do you want to solve your problem from the comfort of home? Then call us at 888-424-2626 to talk with a Freedom Model coach today and experience the Freedom Model difference.